Hello. Okay, so today I would like to talk about midgets. And you will see in the title, it's got a question mark after it. I know a lot of people are going to say, oh, that's an inappropriate word to say. And we're going to get into that. That's why I got the question mark up there. So, we called them midgets when I was a kid. Up in the sometime in the late 70s, early 80s, people came around and said, no, that's offensive, you shouldn't say that. Now, why shouldn't you say it? Nobody said. They just said it's offensive, you shouldn't say it. Well, I like crossword puzzles. In fact, most of my family does. So as a kid, being one of the younger kids, I almost never got my hands on a crossword puzzle. Went to college, got this school paper, had a crossword puzzle in it. I finally get to do them. And there would be clue to the crossword puzzle, midge. I have no clue what this means. However, after working several crossword puzzles, don't know, what across, midge. Don't know what the answer is. But 1 down, 2 down, 3 down, 4 down, I'm filling in those letters. And find out that a midge is another name for a gnat. And being familiar with languages and how they work, I am aware that adding et orette to the end of something, midget, you're making the diminutive of that. So a midget is a small gnat. Now I can understand, yes, that is definitely offensive. Just to be sure, I looked this up online because, yes, there are times I've made assumptions and got it wrong. So I looked it up online, and yes, the term midget does come from small gnat. According to the internet, P.T. Barnum is the one who coined the phrase or popularized it because he had midgets in his sideshow. Which leads us to question number 2. So Barnum, I have heard said that he treated his sideshow people well. So it wasn't meant as an insult. It was just meant to be a descriptive phrase when he used it. However, he did refer to them as freaks. So we can go, is this a good thing or a bad thing? Hard to say. Now then, most of you watching have probably had no idea what a midge was until I said it just a while ago. And even if you did know what a midge was, did you make the connection between midge and midget? Or did you wait until I did for you? I bring this up because, okay, so we're told midget is a insulting term, which I can see that now. Now that I know what a midge is, I can see that. However, don't call them midgets, call them little people. And that's one thing I always wanted, even before I knew what a midge was, I had to wonder, how is that less of an insult? Like I said, I didn't know what a midget was. It was just a word. Little person, yeah, I could piece that together, and it sounds like an insult to some extent. So that's what's got me questioning, sort of part of why I'm making this video. Now, actually, I started thinking about this more recently. I thought about it in the past, back when I learned what a midge was, years ago. Never thought to make a video on it until recently. I started watching, popping into my feed, Brad Williams. He is a comic who is, stand-up comedian who happens to be midget, little person, however you want to phrase it. He uses the phrases interchangeably. He actually jokes about how he's allowed to and no one else, the rest of us aren't, or us taller people aren't at least. That's part of his routine. He sort of I don't know if he's being serious or if he's mocking political correctness when he does that. Could be either. But he uses them all interchangeably. He also uses the phrase dwarf. Now, dwarf, as someone who plays Dungeons and Dragons or role-playing games, Pathfinder is actually the one I play. Um, Dwarfs are cool. Now, that's of course as a role-playing gamer. Before this, they were seen as fictional, little fairy creatures of sorts. Fairy used to cover a lot more than just little diminutive winged things. It would cover, or dwarfs as well. They were not considered human. And that is one thing when I'm looking up, what is the correct term to call a midget or whatever. One site I saw said little people, and among this, one of them specified you are emphasizing the fact that they are people. So, dwarf, again, to a role-playing gamer, dwarfs are cool. However, they are a separate race from humans in games. So I can understand why some people would say, okay, dwarfs are, saying dwarf is also an insult. Although, again, like I said, Brad Williams says it. The, I don't know, clinical term, whatever, for the condition where you are born, significantly shorter than average height is dwarfism. And no one complains if you say, oh, he suffers, he has dwarfism. But if you call them a dwarf, they might complain because you're referring to them as something not human. Again, from my point of view, dwarf is the best term. But apparently my opinion doesn't count because I don't suffer from dwarfism. Some people might be offended by being called a dwarf. I don't know. Especially after the CGI monstrosities that came with the Snow White movie. The recent Snow White movie. Okay, so what else can we call them? Now, reading old folklore, as a kid, came across the term mannequin, which derives from Dutch. They spell it with a E. Like that's when I first came across it, like mannequin. Oh, this is like thing you see in a store. Only it's spelled like Mannikin, so not spelled the same. As I was looking this up, found another website where it's like the difference between mannequin was spelled with a K and mannequin spelled with a Q is, spelled with a K, it is a artist's dummy that you can pose it and you can draw, and spelled with a Q, it's something you put in stores and dress up. Which seems like we're going well over the top with our getting specifics. You're going to insult an artist if you refer to a store mannequin as IKIN or his drawing dummy as IQUIN because you're using the wrong mannequin word. But it comes from, like I said, an old book of folklore came across the term mannequin. It was spelled IKIN. Comes from the Dutch. They spelled it with like in two E's, MENNEKIN or something like that. Can't remember exactly. And it was referring to a actual small little, smaller than dwarf, I think. So mannequin, and it's from the Dutch. It literally means small person or small man. So, again, no more or less insulting than referring to them as little people, other than the fact that mannequins were considered a different race, and also we have other things we call mannequins today. We don't want to confuse basically if you say mannequin to someone today, they're going to say, you're referring to like an artificial man. So that's somewhat insulting. You don't want to, so that's not a good one. pygmy. Now, pygmy comes from a Greek word meaning knuckle, and it's because they had a unit of length. Yeah, we have the cubit. It's from the elbow to the tip of the finger. Finger, elbow to the knuckle was considered to be a pygmy, according to the Greeks. And so, cubit's about 18 inches. A pygmy would be about 2 inches shorter than that, roughly. So maybe 16 inches. Move forward in history a little bit, and the Romans started talking about a race of people who were pygmy size, so they referred to them as pygmies. And again, we're talking elbow to knuckles. When you make a fist, this is shorter than your knee. This is definitely, a fictional thing, not referring to modern day midget little people, however you want to phrase it. Because they're on average, some of them can get up to 4 feet tall. Somewhere between 3 and 4 feet is, I think, average for them. So definitely referring to a different race. Europeans started exploring the world, came across tribes that they referred to as pygmies, who, not quite sure about this one, but I'm thinking most of them were probably what we would refer to as midgets as I was a child, or little people today, or however you. Again, I'm going to be jumping back and forth on these phrases because I don't want to insult people, but at the same time, I am going to default back to what I grew up with from time to time, just because habit. Yeah, this is the thing. I don't normally talk about this topic because it doesn't come up. TV and movies are my most experience with little people, midgets, whatever you want to refer to them. Like I said, recently started seeing Brad Williams casts or videos. In real life, maybe, this is the interesting bit, I might have seen 1 or 2 actual midgets, little people, however, again, growing up. Until about a week ago, I saw a third, or a second perhaps. Again, I don't know how many I saw growing up. That's how infrequent it is. And so, like I said, it's not a word I use on a regular basis just because it doesn't come up that often. So there's that. Then we get to homunculus. Came across this word. This is again back. It's Latin. Literally means little man or little person. However, it originates around the time when people were making, alchemy. The alchemists were doing all their stuff, and so among other things, they wanted to find the Philosopher's Stone, which gives immortal life and all. So they would study, and so one of the things that they talked about was making a little artificial man. How tall would this be? Don't know. But the concept came up, and of course it became an evil concept because you're creating life, which you shouldn't be doing. And, the alchemists, the successful ones, are the ones, history says were successful, were to some extent believed to be playing around with the devil. So this thing you're creating is possibly possessed. Nobody knows. Again, in reality, did they ever exist? Probably not. But, people believe they did. Now, that's the weird thing about this one is the name itself sounds cool. I'm a homunculus. Especially there were dwarven wrestlers or whatever at one point, or midget wrestlers if you want to refer to it, back in the 60s and 70s it was a thing. So someone calling himself the homunculus as a wrestling name sounds like something someone would have done. But again, you look at it's basically an artificial construct, and at that, it's possibly possessed. Bit of an insult. So yeah, I would not go around calling people homunculus, even though it sounds cooler than most of the other names. Especially, it sounds much cooler than a little person. So that is it. Like I said, not my intent to insult anyone, but at the same time, growing up, especially when I first heard call them little person, I wondered how is that not an insult in and of itself. And so gave some reasons why. Also gave some reasons to look at it as still a potential insult. Me personally, like I said, I'm either going to default to midget because that's what I said growing up when it was more of an issue or more fascinating when I first learned about them, or I will default to dwarf just because dwarfs are cool. And again, some people will be insulted by dwarf, other people won't. We refer to it as dwarfism, so I've got that at least to lean back on. That's it. Have a nice day.